Winston traced his fingers across the leather-bound volumes in his parents' library, breathing in the familiar scent that had always brought him comfort. The room held countless memories, late-night discussions with his father, Bernard Winston, about ancient civilizations, heated debates with his mother, Beatrice Winston, about his future, and peaceful hours spent lost in historical texts. Now, with both Bernard and Beatrice gone, the library felt like the last bastion of normalcy in his world. He pulled out a first-edition history text, a gift from his father on his 25th birthday. Bernard Winston had built Winston Technologies from nothing, transforming it into a technological powerhouse worth hundreds of millions. Despite his remarkable success in the corporate world, Bernard had always supported Graham's passion for history, even when it diverged dramatically from the family business. "Your mind is your greatest asset, son," Bernard had told him, handing over the carefully wrapped book. "Whether you use it to build microchips or uncover the secrets of the past, what matters is that you use it well." Beatrice Winston had been less understanding, a woman of sharp business acumen and even sharper ambition. She had never quite accepted Graham's decision to pursue academia over industry. "You're wasting your potential," she would say, her voice a mixture of disappointment and frustration. "Winston Technologies needs minds like yours." The click of heels against marble interrupted his reminiscence. Vanessa, his wife of 3 years, appeared in the doorway. She wore a designer black dress that hugged her curves perfectly, her dark hair styled immaculately despite the somber occasion of the funeral. Even in mourning, she looked as though she had stepped off a magazine cover. "There you are," she said, her red lips curving into what might have been meant as a smile. "I've been looking everywhere for you." Graham observed her carefully. Vanessa had always been ambitious, much like his mother. It was what had first drawn him to her, that fierce determination and unwavering drive. But lately, something had changed. The warmth that used to soften her sharp edges had disappeared, replaced by an icy calculation that made him increasingly uneasy. "I needed some time alone," he replied, replacing the book on its shelf. The funeral was overwhelming. Vanessa moved into the room, her heels marking each step with precise clicks. Of course it was overwhelming. Bernard and Beatrice were pillars of the community. Half the tech industry showed up to pay their respects. She paused, studying him with those keen eyes. "But we need to think about the future now, Graham. About Winston Technologies." Before Graham could respond, another set of footsteps approached. Gregory Andrews, his childhood friend and the family's lawyer, appeared in the doorway. His usually cheerful face was serious, and he carried a thick manila folder under his arm. "Graham," Gregory nodded, then glanced at Vanessa. "Mrs. Winston, I hope I'm not interrupting." Vanessa's expression flickered with annoyance, but she quickly masked it. "Not at all. I was just leaving to make some calls." She touched Graham's arm briefly, a gesture that felt more perfunctory than affectionate, before striding out of the library. Gregory waited until her footsteps faded before speaking. "I have the wills here, Graham. Your father was very specific about everything." He placed the folder on a nearby table and opened it, revealing neat stacks of legal documents. Graham sat down heavily in one of the leather armchairs, bracing himself. "What did they leave behind, Gregory?" "They've left you a substantial sum," Gregory began, pulling out several papers, enough to live very comfortably without ever needing to work. "Your sister, Juliet, receives the same amount. The rest goes to various charities they supported over the years." Graham frowned, scanning the documents. "But what about Winston Technologies? I don't see anything about the company here." Gregory's expression grew more serious. "That's because there's nothing to leave, Graham. Your father sold Winston Technologies 2 years ago." The words hit Graham like a physical blow. "What? That's impossible. I would have known." "Would you?" Gregory asked gently. "You've been focused on your research, living your own life. Bernard sold to Zenitron Tech when his health started declining. He didn't want the company to suffer through a prolonged transition of power." Graham leaned back, trying to process this information. His father had always been pragmatic, always thinking 10 steps ahead. It made sense in a way that still hurt deeply. Why didn't they tell me? Bernard didn't want you to worry, Gregory explained. He knew you'd drop everything to help if you realized how serious things were getting. He wanted you to live your life, pursue your passions. The sound of heels clicking against marble returned, growing louder. Vanessa appeared in the doorway again, her phone pressed to her ear. She was speaking in low, urgent tones to someone but stopped abruptly when she saw Gregory was still there. "I'll call you back," she said into the phone, ending the call. Her eyes darted between Graham and Gregory, then to the documents spread across the table. "What's all this?" "Just going over some details of the will," Gregory replied smoothly, gathering the papers back into the folder. "Nothing that can't wait until tomorrow." He gave Graham a meaningful look. "Why don't we continue this discussion over coffee in the morning?" Graham nodded, understanding the unspoken message. "Yes, that would be better. Thank you, Gregory." After Gregory left, Vanessa settled into the chair opposite Graham. "So what did they leave us?" The word "us" struck Graham as odd. His parents had never fully warmed to Vanessa, though they'd been unfailingly polite. They had seen something in her that he'd been too blind to notice, or too in love to acknowledge. "They left enough," he replied carefully, studying her reaction. "We won't have to worry about money." Vanessa's perfectly manicured nails drummed against the arm of her chair. "And Winston Technologies. What about the company?" Graham made a split-second decision. "We'll discuss all that tomorrow with Gregory. It's been a long day." Vanessa's eyes narrowed slightly, but she nodded. "Of course. You're right." She stood up, smoothing her dress. "I'm going to make some more calls. Will you be up soon?" "In a while," Graham replied, turning back to the bookshelves. "I need some more time here." After she left, Graham pulled out his phone and typed a message to Bianca, another lawyer friend from college. "Need to talk. Coffee tomorrow. Important." The response came quickly. "Of course." The usual place, 9 a.m. Graham sent a quick confirmation, then sank deeper into his chair. The library's familiar scent no longer brought comfort. Instead, it reminded him of all the things he might have missed, all the signs he might have ignored. His father had always taught him to trust his instincts, and right now, those instincts were screaming that something was very wrong. The coffee shop was quiet at 9 in the morning. Most of the business crowd had already rushed off to their offices. Bianca was already there when Graham arrived, a large cup of black coffee in front of her. Her sharp features were pinched with concern as she watched him approach. "You look like hell," she said by way of greeting, pushing a second cup toward him. "I ordered your usual." Graham sat down heavily, grateful for the caffeine. "Thanks. It's been complicated." Bianca leaned forward, her professional demeanor softening with friendly concern. "Talk to me, Graham. What's going on?" He took a long sip of coffee, gathering his thoughts. "Did you know my father sold Winston Technologies?" Bianca's eyebrows shot up. "No, I hadn't heard that." "When?" 2 years ago, apparently. "To Zenitron Tech." Graham watched her reaction carefully. "Gregory told me yesterday after the funeral." "And Vanessa, how did she take the news?" Graham's mouth twisted. "I haven't told her yet. Something doesn't feel right, Bianca. She's been acting strangely lately, making lots of phone calls, being secretive." Bianca was quiet for a moment, stirring her coffee absently. "Graham, there's something you should know." She hesitated, then continued. "I saw Vanessa last week at Rosini's, that Italian place downtown." "Yes." She wasn't alone. Bianca's voice was gentle but firm. She was with a man. They looked intimate, holding hands across the table, speaking closely. The words hit Graham hard, but a part of him had been expecting something like this. "Are you sure?" "I wish I wasn't." Bianca reached across the table and squeezed his hand. I saw them in the parking lot afterward. The way they were together. It wasn't professional, Graham. Graham withdrew his hand, his mind racing. Did you recognize him? No, but he was well dressed. Expensive watch. That type. They seemed very comfortable together. Bianca paused. I didn't want to tell you without being certain, especially with everything else going on. But after you messaged me last night, you did the right thing, Graham assured her, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Did Vanessa see you? No, I don't think so. I was leaving just as they arrived. Bianca studied his face. What are you thinking? Graham's expression hardened. I'm thinking it's time I did some digging of my own. Vanessa has been pushing for information about Winston Technologies, acting like she's entitled to it. Now, I know why. Be careful, Graham. If she's planning something. Oh, I'll be careful, he replied, a cold smile playing at his lips. I'm a historian, remember. Research is what I do best. Bianca nodded slowly. What do you need from me? Legal expertise, maybe. And discretion. Graham finished his coffee. I need to know exactly what I'm dealing with before I make my next move. You have both, Bianca assured him. But Graham, what will you do if your suspicions are correct? His expression turned steely. Then I'll make sure she regrets ever thinking she could play me for a fool. After leaving Bianca, Graham made another call, this time to Jonas, his father's former IT specialist. They arranged to meet at the old bar where they used to play pool after school while Bernard worked late at the office. Jonas was already there when Graham arrived, nursing a beer despite the early hour. His face lit up when he saw Graham, then turned serious at the look in his friend's eyes. This isn't a social call, is it? Jonas asked as Graham sat down. No, it's not. Graham ordered a water, needing a clear head. I need everything you have on Winston Technologies, sales documents, new tech development. Everything. Jonas whistled low. That's a lot of sensitive information, man. Your dad is gone. Graham finished firmly. And something isn't right, Jonas. I need to know what I'm dealing with. Jonas studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Okay. I kept backups of everything. Force of habit. I'll bring you a hard drive tomorrow. Thank you. Graham leaned back, his mind already racing through possibilities. One more thing. I might need your help with some surveillance later. Nothing illegal, just information gathering. A slow grin spread across Jonas's face, just like old times, huh? Remember when we used to hack the school's grading system? This is a bit more serious than changing gym class grades. Graham replied, but he couldn't help returning the smile. Are you in? For you? Always. Jonas finished his beer. Just tell me what you need. Back at home, Graham found Vanessa in the kitchen, typing rapidly on her laptop. She closed it quickly when he entered, but not before he caught a glimpse of what looked like property listings. Productive morning? She asked, her tone casual. Very, he replied with matching casualness. I had coffee with Bianca, caught up on some things. Something flickered in Vanessa's eyes at the mention of Bianca's name, but she masked it quickly. That's nice. I've been making arrangements for the house. We should think about selling it, you know. Too many painful memories. Graham studied her, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time. The calculating look in her eyes, the careful way she watched him, the slight tension in her shoulders, signs he had missed or ignored before. No rush, he said mildly. We have time to think things through. Vanessa's phone buzzed, and she glanced at it quickly. I have to take this business call. As she hurried from the room, Graham allowed himself a grim smile. Let her think she had him fooled. Let her think she was in control. He had learned from his father that the best strategy was to let your opponent underestimate you while you gathered strength, and Graham Winston was done being underestimated. The next morning, Jonas arrived at Graham's office with an external hard drive tucked safely in his messenger bag. Dark circles under his eyes suggested he'd spent the night preparing the data. Everything's here, Jonas said, placing the drive on Graham's desk. Sales documents, tech development files, internal communications, everything I could salvage from the old servers. Graham connected the drive to his computer, his eyes widening as folder upon folder of information populated the screen. This is incredible, Jonas. How did you manage to keep all this? Jonas grinned, dropping into a chair. Your dad always said to keep backups of the backups. I was just following orders. His expression turned serious. But Graham, some of this stuff is sensitive. The new tech your parents were working on before the sale. It's revolutionary. Graham opened several files, scanning through technical specifications and development notes. They were working on quantum computing applications, among other things. Jonas nodded. The sale to Xenotron Tech was fair. They paid market value plus a premium for the intellectual property. But if someone had known about these developments beforehand, they could have made a fortune. They'd stand to profit immensely. Graham finished, his mind racing. He pulled up the sales documents, studying the details carefully. The timing of the sale. Did anyone else know it was coming? Jonas shook his head. Your dad kept it quiet. Only the board and key executives knew until it was done. He was careful. Graham leaned back in his chair. I need you to do something else for me, Jonas, something discreet. Name it. I need surveillance software installed on Vanessa's devices, phone, laptop, everything. Graham held up a hand as Jonas started to protest. Nothing illegal, just monitoring. I need to know who she's been talking to. Jonas studied him for a long moment. You think she's up to something? I think she's been playing a long game, Graham replied grimly, and I need to know exactly what it is. After some discussion of technical details, Jonas got to work. Within hours, he had remote access to Vanessa's digital life. What they found confirmed Graham's worst suspicions. Messages between Vanessa and a man named Colin revealed a relationship going back months. But it wasn't just a simple affair. They had been plotting, planning, discussing ways to get control of Winston Technologies. Look at this. Jonas pointed to a message thread. Once we push Graham out, Winston Technologies will be ours. He's too wrapped up in his books to see what's coming. Graham read through the messages, anger building with each revelation. Vanessa and Colin had been planning to push him out, to take control of what they still believed was a family-owned company. They had even discussed how to handle him if he proved difficult. I found Colin's social media profiles, Jonas announced, pulling up several windows. Colin Avery, real estate developer, drives expensive cars, lives in the Heights, always posing with rich women in his photos, basically a professional gold digger. Graham murmured, and Vanessa fell for it. Over the next few days, Graham gathered and organized the evidence. He set up dummy social media accounts to monitor Colin's activities, tracked Vanessa's movements through her phone's GPS, and recorded her conversations with her co-conspirator. The picture that emerged was damning. Vanessa and Colin had been meeting regularly at upscale restaurants and hotels, always careful to avoid places where they might be recognized. Their messages revealed not just a romantic affair, but a calculated scheme to gain control of what they thought was still a multi-million-dollar company. They've been sloppy, Jonas commented, scrolling through more messages. They were so confident they wouldn't get caught. They'd barely bothered to hide their tracks. Graham nodded grimly. Overconfidence. That's always been Vanessa's weakness. She's been acting almost smug, like she's already won. She thinks she has everything figured out. Jonas looked up. What are you going to do? Spring the trap, Graham replied, his voice cold. But first, I need to make sure everything is in place. We have to be methodical. When I move, I want it to be decisive. That evening, Graham returned home to find Vanessa on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She looked up as he entered, offering one of her practiced smiles. You're home late. Had some things to take care of at the office, he replied casually, noting how she tried to subtly angle her phone screen away from him. Actually, I need to talk to you about something. Vanessa's posture shifted slightly, almost imperceptibly tensing. "Oh, I'm planning to go to the company tomorrow," Graham said, watching her reaction carefully. "There are some matters that need attention. I'd like you to come with me." Vanessa's eyes lit up with barely concealed triumph. "Of course, darling. What time should we leave?" "Let's aim for 9, he replied, hiding his disgust at how transparent she was. "It's important that we're both there." "Perfect." Vanessa smiled, already reaching for her phone. "I'll clear my schedule." Graham retreated to his study, where he spent the next few hours finalizing preparations. He organized all the evidence Jonas had gathered: text messages, call logs, GPS data, financial records. He prepared multiple copies, storing them securely in different locations. Then he called Gregory. "Everything's ready," he told his friend. "Are you sure you want to be there tomorrow?" "Wouldn't miss it," Gregory replied. "Besides, you might need legal counsel on hand." After hanging up, Graham sat in the darkness of his study, reflecting on how much his life had changed in such a short time. His parents were gone. His marriage was a sham. The woman he'd loved was plotting against him. But instead of breaking him, these revelations had awakened a cold, calculating fury that demanded satisfaction. He recalled his father's words from years ago. "In business, son, it's not enough to win. You have to win so thoroughly that your opponents never think of challenging you again." Tomorrow, he would show Vanessa and her conspirator exactly what it meant to cross a Winston. They thought him weak, absorbed in books, easy to manipulate, easy to discard. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. Graham spent the rest of the evening reviewing the evidence one last time, ensuring there were no loose ends. He had proof of their affair, their conspiracy, and their plans to seize control of a company that wasn't even there to take. Tomorrow, he would watch their carefully constructed plans crumble, and he would show no mercy. The Winston Technologies lobby held an eerie silence as Graham and Vanessa stepped through the glass doors. Their footsteps echoed against marble, each step bringing them closer to the inevitable confrontation. Vanessa strode ahead, shoulders back, radiating confidence, while Graham maintained a calculated distance behind her. The security guard at the desk looked up, confusion crossing his face. "Can I help you?" "I'm Vanessa Winston," she announced, her voice dripping with authority. "My husband and I are here for an important meeting." Graham watched as she pulled out an old Winston Technologies ID card, noting how she planned this moment. The guard glanced at the card, then at his computer screen, his brow furrowing. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but this ID isn't valid anymore. The building belongs to Zenitron Tech now." Vanessa's composure slipped for a fraction of a second before she recovered. "There must be some mistake. We're here to discuss the transition of power. My husband is Bernard Winston's son." The guard picked up his phone, making a quick call. After a brief conversation, he nodded. "Mr. Winston, you and your wife can go up. Someone from Zenitron Tech will meet you." They rode the elevator in silence. Vanessa stood tall, shoulders back, radiating confidence. Graham observed her reflection in the polished doors, noting how she checked her appearance, practiced her smile, and readied herself for what she believed would be her triumphant moment. The executive floor was different now. Gone were the familiar Winston Technologies logos, replaced by Zenitron Tech's modern branding. A young executive assistant met them, leading them to what had once been Bernard Winston's office. "Please, make yourselves comfortable," she said. "Someone will be with you shortly." The moment the door closed, Vanessa made her way to the CEO's chair, settling into it with a satisfied smile. She ran her hands along the armrests, claiming the space as her own. "Finally," she declared, turning to face Graham. Her hand reached into her designer bag, pulling out a thick manila envelope. "Now I'm the CEO of this company." She tossed the envelope onto the desk. "If you don't agree with this, here are your divorce papers." Graham couldn't help it. The sheer audacity, the complete and utter delusion, struck him as darkly hilarious. He started laughing softly at first, then building to a genuine laugh that filled the room. Vanessa's triumphant expression faltered. "What's so funny?" she snapped. Graham composed himself, wiping at his eyes. "Oh, Vanessa, you really are something else." His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "What are you talking about?" He pulled out his phone, taking his time as he brought up the evidence he'd gathered. "Let me show you something interesting." He turned the screen toward her, playing a recording of her conversation with Colin. Her own voice filled the room. "Once we push Graham out, Winston Technologies will be ours. He's too wrapped up in his books to see what's coming." Vanessa's face drained of color. Graham swiped to the next piece of evidence. Text messages about seizing control of the company, photos of secret meetings, financial records showing their preparations. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" Graham's voice remained calm and controlled. "Did you think I was that stupid? How did you?" Vanessa started to rise from the chair, but Graham cut her off. "I'm a historian, Vanessa. Finding and analyzing evidence is what I do best." He moved closer to the desk, placing both hands on its surface. "But here's the real punchline. There is no company to take over. My father sold Winston Technologies to Zenitron Tech 2 years ago." Vanessa's carefully constructed facade crumbled. She looked around the office with new eyes, finally noticing the changed logos and different decor. "No," she whispered. "That's impossible." "Is it?" Graham pulled out more documents. The sale agreement, transfer papers, everything Jonas had provided. "While you were plotting to steal my family's company, my father was making sure it would survive his illness. He sold it at its peak, donated most of the money to charity, and left just enough to ensure his children would be comfortable." Vanessa stumbled back from the desk, her legs bumping the chair. "You knew all this time?" "Not at first," Graham admitted. "But once I started looking, it wasn't hard to piece it all together. You and Colin weren't exactly subtle." He picked up the divorce papers she'd brought, raising an eyebrow. "Though I have to admire your confidence, bringing these today. Let me guess. You plan to force me to sign away my rights in exchange for a quick divorce." Vanessa remained silent, her face pale. Graham pulled out another set of documents from his briefcase. "These are my divorce papers, prepared by my lawyers. You'll find them quite different from yours. Given the evidence I have of your conspiracy and infidelity, and thanks to the prenuptial agreement you signed, you'll be leaving this marriage with exactly what you brought into it." He gave her a cold, triumphant smile. "Nothing. You can't do this," Vanessa hissed, her composure fracturing. "I already have," Graham replied, his voice icy. "Your lover Colin has already received copies of everything I have. His clients, business partners, and family will all know what kind of man he really is. As for you," he continued, "well, let's just say your reputation in this city is about to take quite a hit." Vanessa lunged for her bag, probably reaching for her phone. But Graham was faster. He held up a USB drive, looking for a way to warn Colin, "Don't bother. By now, he's getting some very interesting calls. It's amazing how quickly people distance themselves when they discover someone's true nature." The door opened, and Gregory stepped in with 2 security guards from Zenitron Tech. "Mr. Winston," one guard said, "we'll need to ask you and your wife to leave the premises." "Of course," Graham replied smoothly. "We were just finishing up." He turned back to Vanessa, who stood frozen behind the desk. "You wanted to be CEO so badly, Vanessa. How does it feel to know you've been playing chess while the board was already packed away?" The security guards escorted them out of the building. In the lobby, Vanessa finally found her voice. "This isn't over, Graham." He turned to her, his expression hard. "You're right about that. This is just the beginning of what you've earned. I trusted you, Vanessa. I loved you. And you plotted to destroy me." He stepped closer, his voice dropping so only she could hear. "Now you get to experience what it feels like to lose everything." The divorce proceedings moved with brutal efficiency. Gregory had prepared everything meticulously, and Vanessa's attempts to fight back crumbled under the weight of overwhelming evidence. The prenuptial agreement she had signed, believing it a mere formality, now became her undoing. In the judge's chambers, Vanessa's lawyer attempted one last desperate negotiation. "Your Honor, my client is willing to." "Your client," Gregory interrupted, "conspired to fraudulently seize control of a company worth hundreds of millions. We have evidence of her plotting with her lover to force my client out of his own family's business. The prenuptial agreement is clear. Infidelity and criminal conspiracy are grounds for forfeiture of all marital assets." The judge reviewed the evidence files, his expression growing darker with each page. "Mrs. Winston, this is very serious. You're fortunate your husband isn't pursuing criminal charges." Vanessa shot a venomous look at Graham, who sat calmly, observing the proceedings. Her once perfect appearance had begun to show cracks. No designer outfit could hide the strain of the past weeks. "The prenuptial agreement stands," the judge declared. "The divorce is granted under the terms presented by Mr. Winston's counsel." Outside the courthouse, reporters had gathered, drawn by leaked details of the scandal. Vanessa's carefully cultivated social media presence turned against her as screenshots of her messages with Colin circulated online. Graham watched from his car as Vanessa pushed through the throng of journalists, her face hidden behind large sunglasses. She had lost everything: her status, her reputation, her lover. Colin had disappeared the moment things became difficult, his own career in shambles after Graham's evidence reached his clients and partners. "Are you sure about this?" Gregory asked from the passenger seat. "We could have pursued criminal charges and taken her for everything." "This is better," Graham replied, starting the engine. "Money she could recover from. A prison sentence would end eventually. But her reputation, that's a far better punishment." Back at his office, Graham reviewed the final divorce papers. The Winston name Vanessa had coveted so dearly was now legally stripped from her. The prenuptial agreement had protected his assets, and her attempts to claim any part of his inheritance had failed entirely. Bianca arrived with coffee and a stack of newspapers. "Your front-page news," she said, laying them out. Each one carried the story of Vanessa's downfall, her conspiracy exposed, her social standing in ruins. "How's Colin?" Graham asked, though he already knew. Bianca's smile was satisfied. His development company lost 3 major contracts this morning. 2 more clients pulled out of deals. His mother, who always defended him, isn't speaking to him after seeing what he planned to do to you. Graham nodded, remembering the look on Colin's face when the first calls came in. The man had built his career on charm and connections, now all of them poisoned by the revelation of his true character. "Have you heard from Vanessa?" Bianca asked gently. "She tried calling yesterday," Graham replied, voice devoid of emotion. "I blocked her number." Bianca studied him for a moment. "And the charitable trust?" Graham pulled out his father's old journal, opening it to a marked page. "Yes, it's what they would have wanted. The money they left me will do good work, help people who deserve it." He looked up at Bianca. Vanessa thought the Winston name was about power and wealth. She never understood it was about legacy, making a difference. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. Graham focused on establishing the charitable trust, honoring his parents' wishes for their fortune to benefit others. He sold the old Winston house, unable to face the memories it held, and moved into a modern apartment free of echoes from his life with Vanessa. Reports reached him of Vanessa's attempts to rebuild. She'd been fired once the scandal broke. No company wanted to risk association with someone who'd plotted corporate theft. Her once wide social circle had vanished, friends distancing themselves in the face of controversy. Colin faced his own reckoning. His real estate empire crumbled, built as it was on reputation and relationships. His mother stopped speaking to him, and his clients fled. One evening, as Graham reviewed applications for the trust's first round of grants, Jonas arrived with new information. "They're not taking it well," Jonas reported, flipping open his laptop. "Vanessa and Colin had a big fight yesterday. She blames him for underestimating you. He blames her for not knowing about the company's sale. It got ugly." Graham studied the surveillance photos, noting how different Vanessa looked now, without designer clothes or perfect makeup, replaced by a haunted expression. They're running out of options, Jonas continued. Colin's trying to salvage what he can, but no one will work with him. Vanessa's been blacklisted from most corporate jobs in Bridgeport. Good, Graham said simply. They wanted to destroy me, and instead they destroyed themselves. What else? Jonas hesitated. They've been meeting with someone named Tobias Hale, ex-military, turned private investigator. He has a reputation for being ruthless and willing to do anything for the right price. Graham's mind raced through the implications. Keep watching them. If they're planning something, we'll be ready. What do you think they're planning? Nothing good, Graham replied, his voice cold. But they've already shown their true colors. Whatever they try next, they'll find I'm not the same man they try to deceive. As if to underscore his point, Graham's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Vanessa, no doubt, trying another way to reach him. He blocked the number without reading it. Let her stew in the consequences of her actions. Let her realize the quiet scholar she dismissed was the architect of her downfall. Meanwhile, Tobias Hale sat in his dimly lit office, studying the files spread across his desk. Photos of Graham Winston, surveillance reports, financial records, all pieces of a puzzle he was paid to solve. Vanessa and Colin sat across from him, their desperation palpable. He destroyed us, Vanessa said, her once perfectly manicured nails now chipped. We need to make him pay. Tobias leaned back in his chair, assessing these new clients. Tell me about his weaknesses. Everyone has them. Colin shifted uncomfortably. He's not who we thought he was. He's ruthless. Vanessa added bitterly, cold, calculating. But he has a soft spot. His sister, Juliet. Tobias's interest piqued. Tell me more about the sister. They're close, Vanessa explained. After their parents died, she's all he has left. She's his vulnerability. Tobias pulled out a fresh notepad. What's her routine? Where does she live, work, socialize? As Vanessa and Colin shared everything they knew about Juliet Winston, Tobias took detailed notes. A plan formed in his mind, one that could restore his clients to what they still fantasized as glory. But first, he needed resources. He named a figure that made both of them flinch. We don't have that kind of money anymore, Colin protested. Graham made sure of that. Tobias gave a cold smile. Then find it. Because without resources, you're just two desperate people with a grudge. Vanessa's hand went to her throat, touching one of the few pieces of valuable jewelry she still owned. I can get some of it. And Colin can sell his car. Good. Tobias stood, signaling the end of the meeting. Get me the money, then we'll talk specifics. Over the following days, Tobias's team tracked Juliet's movements, photographed her leaving her apartment, monitored her social media, mapped her routines. Each piece of data was another weapon in their arsenal. Meanwhile, Vanessa and Colin scraped together whatever resources they could, selling off their remaining valuables. Their desperation made them sloppy. Jonas continued feeding Graham updates. They've hired someone named Tobias Hale, ex-military. This guy is serious business, Graham. Definitely not a garden-variety PI. Graham's mind raced. Stay on them. They won't catch us off guard. I have a bad feeling about this, Jonas warned. Be careful, Graham. Graham nodded grimly. I will. Juliet, unaware of the looming threat, called Graham one morning. Hey, are we still on for dinner tomorrow? Of course, he replied, pushing aside his worries. Our usual place. Perfect. I have so much to tell you about the new project at work. Hanging up, Graham stared out the window of his high-rise apartment. Something was coming. He could feel it. Vanessa and Colin were desperate, and they'd hired Tobias Hale. But Graham had learned never to underestimate the power of desperation. The next day, everything changed. Graham's phone clattered against his desk as Juliet's terrified voice cut off mid-sentence. The silence that followed stretched into a dreadful eternity, broken only by the pounding of his heart. Her words echoed. "They took me. Please help me." He punched in Gregory's number, his fingers steadier than the rage roaring through him. "They have Juliet," he said the moment Gregory answered. "No time to explain." "I'm on my way," Gregory replied without hesitation. "Call Jonas." Jonas answered on the first ring. "What do you need?" "Track Juliet's phone," Graham commanded, already pulling up the surveillance files on Vanessa and Colin. "They've taken her. Find her." "On it," Jonas said, keys clicking in the background. "I'm picking up her signal. Sending you access now." Graham pulled up the tracking data on his laptop. The signal pulsed steadily from an industrial area on the city's outskirts. He recognized the location. An abandoned warehouse district slated for redevelopment. Gregory arrived at Graham's apartment in minutes, his usual polished look now disheveled. Bianca's running background checks on Tobias Hale's known associates. She found some interesting connections to that area. Jonas's voice came through the speaker. "Warehouse 47. Used to be a storage facility. Hale's name is on some old lease documents." "We're going," Graham said, checking the small black case in his desk. Inside lay a handgun. His father had insisted he learn to shoot. "Thomas, you drive." Gregory frowned at the weapon. "Do you know how to use that?" "My father insisted," Graham replied, his tone grim. He said knowledge wasn't always enough. Sometimes you need to protect yourself more directly. "Let's move." They met Jonas near the warehouse. His van was packed with surveillance gear, monitors showing thermal imaging of the target building. 5 heat signatures inside, Jonas said, pointing at the screen. 3 clustered in what looks like an office, 2 more patrolling the main floor. Juliet's signal is in the northwest corner. Graham studied the layout. "Gregory, you and Jonas handle the guards. I'm going for Juliet." "What about Vanessa and the others?" Gregory asked. "They're mine." Graham checked his weapon. "No one threatens my sister and walks away." They moved through the shadows, approaching from different angles. Jonas guided them around blind spots. The first guard never saw Gregory coming. A quick strike, and the man went down silently. The second turned at a noise, only to be dropped by Jonas's taser. Both guards were secured with zip ties. Graham approached the office area, hearing voices through the thin walls. Vanessa's sharp tones were unmistakable, arguing with Colin. Tobias's deep baritone responded. Graham kicked the door in, revealing the startled faces of his enemies. Vanessa perched on a desk, her outfit a bitter reminder of her once polished life. Colin sat, trying to look confident but failing. Tobias stood by a grimy window, his professional mask cracking at the sudden intrusion. "Where is she?" Graham's voice was deadly calm. Vanessa recovered first, smirking. "Look who finally showed up. Your sister's been asking for you. You shouldn't have involved her." Graham raised his gun, aiming at Tobias. "This was between us." "Business is business," Tobias shrugged, though his eyes flicked to the weapon. "Nothing personal." "Taking my sister is personal." Graham's finger tightened on the trigger. "Last chance." "Where?" Colin broke first, his voice trembling. "Northwest storage room." "She's in the northwest storage room." "Coward," Vanessa spat, but fear replaced her earlier smugness. Graham kept his gun trained on Tobias. "Gregory, get Juliet." "Jonas, call the police. Tell them we have evidence of kidnapping." And more. Gregory and Jonas rushed out. Graham turned his gaze to Vanessa, who stood frozen. "Your final mistake was thinking I wouldn't find out about Tobias Hale's past. Bianca found everything. His trafficking record. The women he's hurt. The police are going to bury him." Tobias's hand twitched toward his jacket, but Graham fired one warning shot into the wall. "Try that again," he growled. "I dare you." Gregory's voice came through Graham's earpiece. "I've got Juliet. She's shaken, but okay." Relief flooded Graham, though his expression remained hard. Juliet and Gregory appeared a moment later, Juliet's hands still bound. Seeing his sister tied and terrified fueled Graham's fury. Vanessa tried to speak, but Graham cut her off. Not another word. You lost that right when you threatened Juliet. Police sirens wailed outside, growing closer. Jonas appeared in the doorway. They're nearly here. I sent them all our evidence. Kidnapping, conspiracy, Tobias's past. Everything. Good, Graham said, never lowering his weapon. You three will sit quietly and wait. Move, and I won't aim for the wall next time. Red and blue lights strobed through the dirty warehouse windows as officers stormed in with weapons drawn. They found 3 suspects sitting under the watch of a man holding his gun with steady confidence. Mr. Winston, said the lead detective, approaching cautiously. We got the files your friend sent. Quite a story. Graham slowly lowered his gun, letting officers secure Vanessa, Colin, and Tobias. My sister's testimony and our evidence should be enough for kidnapping charges. Much more than that, the detective replied, scrolling through his phone. Your friend Bianca sent over a file on Mr. Hale. He's got multiple warrants for trafficking. The DA's going to have a field day. Tobias struggled as officers cuffed him. You don't understand. They hired me. This was their plan. Which makes them conspirators, the detective said firmly. Don't worry, there are plenty of charges to go around. Vanessa maintained her composure as she was cuffed, though her eyes burned with hatred. You ruined everything, she hissed at Graham. No, Vanessa, Graham replied quietly. You destroyed yourself. I just made sure you faced consequences. Colin collapsed into sobbing pleas, begging for mercy. Graham felt only disgust. This was the man Vanessa had chosen. The detective turned back to Graham. We'll need you and your sister at the station for statements tomorrow. We'll be there, Graham said. Then he turned to Juliet. Let's go home. Juliet collapsed into Graham's arms once they exited the building, her tears dampening his shirt. I was so scared, she whispered. But I knew you'd come. Always, he murmured, hugging her close. I'll always protect you. Gregory, Jonas, and Bianca stayed close by, ready to assist. By the time they all returned to Graham's apartment, Juliet had calmed enough to answer the police's initial questions. She was exhausted but unbroken. Graham felt a fierce pride in her strength. Tobias, Vanessa, and Colin went to trial. A media sensation that revealed how they plotted the kidnapping of Juliet Winston. Tobias Hale's trafficking connections came to light in court after Bianca's thorough investigation. He was given life without parole. Vanessa and Colin, found guilty of conspiracy and kidnapping, received long prison terms. Colin testified against Vanessa, earning himself a slightly lighter sentence, but not by much. Graham attended the proceedings each day. Impassive as testimony, confirmed everything he'd discovered. Vanessa held out until the verdicts were read. Guilty on all counts. Her mask finally shattered as she was led away in cuffs. Colin left the courthouse sobbing, while Tobias simply stared ahead, already calculating a hopeless future behind bars. In the months that followed, Graham rebuilt his life. The Winston Charitable Trust flourished, funding programs to help trafficking victims and to support law enforcement. Juliet recovered from her ordeal, devoting herself to advocacy for those who had faced similar terror. The old Winston home was sold, its memories too painful, replaced by Graham's new apartment and the offices of the Winston Foundation. Years passed. The Winston Foundation's annual gala filled the grand ballroom of the Ashford Hotel with city elites. Graham Winston, now in his mid-40s, stood at the podium, addressing the audience with distinguished gray at his temples. 10 years ago, the Winston Foundation began with a simple mission: to protect those who cannot protect themselves. He declared, his voice carrying across the attentive audience. Today, we've helped thousands of trafficking victims rebuild their lives, supported law enforcement agencies in dismantling criminal networks, and provided educational opportunities to at-risk youth. In the front row sat Juliet Winston Matthews and her husband, Adrian, a prosecutor she had met during the trials. Their bond had grown from shared experiences of justice and recovery. Juliet now led the Foundation's victim advocacy program, turning her trauma into a force for good. Gregory Andrews, still Graham's closest friend, and now the Foundation's chief legal counsel, watched from the side. The years had solidified their friendship into unbreakable loyalty. His legal acumen helped shape the Foundation's advocacy work, pushing for stronger trafficking laws and victim protection. Jonas, the Foundation's head of cybersecurity, managed a global network tracking trafficking operations and assisting law enforcement. His technical prowess, once used to expose Vanessa's betrayal, now helped prevent future tragedies. Bianca had become a federal prosecutor specializing in human trafficking cases, her work dismantling networks that preyed on the vulnerable. After his speech, Graham made his way through the crowd, graciously discussing the Foundation's ongoing projects. He still held an academic post, lecturing on historical patterns of crime and justice, and had published several works influencing policy. In his private office later that evening, he reviewed reports from around the world. The Winston Foundation had grown into a major force, working with government agencies and NGOs to fight trafficking everywhere. A message from Gregory lit up his phone. Claire's parole hearing is next month was replaced in this reality by Vanessa's parole hearing is next month, it read. Graham's expression hardened. She won't get parole, he replied. Not with Juliet's victim impact statement and the evidence of her ongoing manipulations. He set the phone aside, recalling how drastically his life had changed after Vanessa's betrayal. That crisis had molded him into someone stronger, a scholar and a protector. No one who threatened his family or his cause would ever forget the consequences. The Winston Foundation's success had brought new challenges as criminals tried to retaliate. But each attempt ran into Graham's carefully prepared defenses. Those who threatened him learned, just as Vanessa had, that Graham Winston was not a man to be crossed. Graham. Juliet knocked on his office door, peering in. We're heading home. Are you coming? He looked up from the final report of the evening and smiled. Yes, let me just wrap this up. Juliet nodded. We'll wait for you by the elevator. When she was gone, Graham gazed at the city lights outside the window. He had honored his parents' wishes, using their legacy to make a positive difference. He balanced his passion for history with a newfound resolve to protect the innocent. The betrayal meant to destroy him had fueled the creation of something powerful, a force for good that would outlast all of them. He picked up his coat and headed for the door, ready to join Juliet, Gregory, Jonas, Bianca, and the rest of his chosen family, ready to continue their mission. The price of betrayal had been high, but from it had grown the price of justice. And Graham Winston, once deemed an easy mark, had proven that beneath the quiet scholar's exterior lay the heart of a man who would do whatever it took to defend the people he loved.